I'm goth, not emo. There is a difference. I said these words in my introduction, and I promised an explanation. Goth and emo come from the same roots, and are often confused as being the same, but they're in fact quite different. So where do they come from? Why do so many people think that this girl and this girl have anything in common? Well, let's start looking at the roots. Back in about the early to mid 1970s, people were referring to what we now refer to as soft rock, Simon and Garfunkel, Billy Joel, etc. Back then they were just called rock and roll. There were a lot of individuals who disagreed with that. They felt that rock and roll should be about rebellion. And so they formed their own bands, and their music was characterized best by the phrase, "I'm angry that I live in such a sad, sad world." This is what was called the punk movement. Now you fast forward a few years, to about 1978, the late 70s, you start seeing bands like U2, Baja, The Cure coming on the scene. And they weren't punk. They had their own sound that was more introverted, more complex, more experimental. Best characterized by the phrase, "I'm sad that I live in such an angry world." So they were called post-punk, because they came after punk. Now, I mentioned that because you fast forward again a couple more years to 1981, and all these post-punk bands start developing their own unique sounds. And from this you get tons of genres of music that we have today. Alternative, indie rock, goth, emo, industrial, the list goes on. The interesting thing for at least goth and emo is that they were very localized. Goth came out of Britain, bands like Baja, Susie and the Banshees, etc., whereas emo tended to come out of Washington, D.C. with bands like Rites of Spring and Grey Matter. So what came of this split? How were they different back then? Well, let's look at the sounds. Goth is characterized very heavily by haunting melodies, things you would expect in a horror movie. Think modern day Evanescence. And the lyrics, still kind of that same tone of, this is what's wrong with the world. Fix it. This is making us sad. Emo, on the other hand, gets its name from emotional. It used to be called emotional hardcore. And it's very characterized by deeply personal, impassioned lyrics. The best way of describing it is, this is what I feel. And you look at the culture, very different culture. First picture here that I showed. This is a goth look. Victorian style, dark colors, lots of religious iconography, crosses, ankhs, etc. Emo, on the other hand, tends to be a lot of bright colors. Really the only dark colors tend to be in the hair, which is characterized by the massive bags covering one or both eyes. Usually they wear band t-shirts. So, is it just the sound and the look that are different between the two, or is there really something more? Well, let's look at modern day. Goths are very characterized as being morbid and fascinated with death, and this is a fair assessment. Most are. There's a fascination with that which society rejects. They embrace. Not everything, not murder, despite what the media will tell us after events like Columbine and other school shootings. But they do embrace most of what society will reject. Goths also tend to be very equal opportunity, even to the point of being female-driven. Probably more than in any other genre of music, you will see female songwriters, singers, producers, lyrics oriented towards females, portraying females in positive roles. It's really, a very proactive culture. And Goths are very proud of who they are. You see all the time in the media saying, "Oh, this is a goth shooting, goth murder." Goths aren't going to hide who they are after that. But what about emos? Well, what about the emo philosophy? What philosophy? Emo culture is purely about the music. And there have been drastic changes throughout various different generations of emo. Emo is already on its 5th or 6th generation. But they're still characterized by very impassioned lyrics. It's more the look that's been changed. They're also very androcentric. Women in emo culture tend to be portrayed as either the muse or the heartbreaker. Very little in between. And finally, even emos don't like being called emo. Two good examples. The bands My Chemical Romance and Panic at the Disco, in 2 separate interviews, said that their opinion is, to quote, "Emo is shit." They don't like emo. And the funny thing is, they're usually labeled as emo bands. So as you can see, despite shared roots, the two are very different, especially in modern day. Hopefully this will help you not make the mistake of confusing one for the other the next time you hear about them.